The bonds aren't going down. They won't move. It's possible that we're in a completely fraudulent system.
Hey guys, Rafi here from the End Game Investor. And last time we talked about central bank insolvency. Well, I found the guy who invented it. No joke. He invented it, and I found him. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you to all the subscribers. We passed 9,000, which is more than 8,000, which is more than 7,000. 9,000 is a very, very special number because it means that 9,000 people have subscribed, and that's really cool.
It's over 9,000! What? 9,000? Come on, that can't be right. It must be broken or something.
And besides subscribing, you can always sign up to be my patron on Patreon, where I will give a weekly video of biblical commentary into monetary policy topics. And there's a lot of monetary policy in the Bible. Or, of course, you can sign up for a 2-week free trial of the End Game Investor, where we discuss the end game scenario unfolding at this very moment. Thank you so much. And let's talk about central banks going bankrupt. Well, you see, I was reading this paper that I found somewhere on Schmoogle, and it was written by a guy named Ricardo Reis, titled Different Types of Central Bank Insolvency and the Central Role of Seigniorage. The first sentence is very revealing. It says, abstract, a central bank is insolvent if its plans imply a Ponzi scheme on reserves so the price level becomes infinity. Here we have the Wikipedia, Ricardo Reis. In the section titled Central Bank Insolvency, it says that in 2013 with Robert E. Hall, Reis invented the concept of central bank insolvency to describe the impact of possible losses from quantitative easing programs. How exactly did central banks go bankrupt before Ricardo Reis? Well, they didn't. He invented it. Before Ricardo Reis, there was no such thing as central bank insolvency. Everything was fine. No hyperinflations. There were no Ponzi schemes on reserves. The price level never went to infinity. If not for Ricardo Reis, Weimar would never have happened, even though he wrote his paper in 2015 and Weimar was in 1923. But, you know, if you can keep printing money forever, I guess you can go back in time too, or something. This all makes sense, so shut up. That's academic speak for hyperinflation. What is a Ponzi scheme on reserves? Well, Ricardo Reis says this. Being the Keynesian economist that he is, he has to put this in equation form, and I'll read it to you in my acumen.
I'm afraid we need to use math.
The no Ponzi scheme condition on reserves states that the limit as t approaches infinity of epsilon sub t bracket m sub t comma big T negative v plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a all over greater than 0. Where tj is a stochastic discount factor that a t. If you didn't understand that, you're an idiot.
I'm sciencing as fast as I can.
I know what the condition of a Ponzi scheme is. It's when you bring more and more investors to pay back old ones. I think Peter Schiff explains this a little bit better.
We're just going to borrow that $5 trillion to pay it back. And so that's our plan, right? The plan is we're going to borrow $5 trillion from the new investors to pay off the old investors. Yeah, that's the plan.
Well, I looked at one of those little footnotes here and I found this. In the concluding remarks of this paper, Reis says, we have provided a systemic analysis of, how do you provide a systemic analyses? It's systemic analyses or a systemic analysis. Well, you know, he's Portuguese. He can't really write English or that well, but he knows about the no Ponzi condition with all the epsilons. Here's the key sentence. However, under new style central banking, that is, with central banks that pay interest on reserves, which is what the Fed does now because there's trillions in excess reserves that it doesn't want to go smashing into the economy, so it has to pay interest on them to keep the banks from lending it out. Those excess reserves have large balance sheets and have exposure to interest rate, default, and exchange rate risk. Net income will sometimes be negative. This is what is happening to the Federal Reserve's balance sheet right now. This rule requires periodic payments from the government to the central bank. Without this direct fiscal backing or its equivalent in the form of programmed reductions in future dividends following an episode of negative income, that means future program reductions in future dividends. Dividends is the cash that the Fed hands out to central banks now for keeping their reserves at bay. And he's saying they're going to have to reduce that. But if they reduce that, then all those excess reserves have to go out into the economy because they can't just stay at the Fed earning nothing. They have to go into the economy and earn something. Anyway, form of programmed reductions in future dividends following an episode of negative income, the central bank could be on an unstable path of endlessly borrowing in the form of reserves. And so we are getting close to that condition of Ponzi, which he described in so many epsilons and infinities and brackets and letters and Greek stuff. And now here is what Reese says in the conclusion of a different paper on a similar topic. He says, a central bank is insolvent if it tries to run a Ponzi scheme on its reserves. Banks no longer want to hold them. They become worthless and the price level becomes infinity. So here you have a Keynesian economist that uses mathematical econometric gobbledygook admitting that it is possible that central bank reserves can become worthless and therefore the price level in terms of the reserves of the central bank becomes infinity. Do prices ever become infinity? No, because what happens when they become infinity in currency terms or in central bank reserve terms is that people resort to gold and silver trading, which we call barter or a gold and silver monetary system, which is what humanity has always done and will continue to do, and in fact actually does now, except with corrupted reserves, with corrupted substitutes in the middle. Well, here we have total portfolio unrealized gains and losses of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, which I found on the New York Fed website. This goes up to 2013. And now that we have Federal Reserve losses of over $1 trillion as admitted by the rise in interest rates, which hurts the portfolio of bonds that they hold, the $9 trillion portfolio of bonds, when you raise interest rates, the value of those bonds goes down and the interest you got to pay on them goes up. This is the history of the gains and losses of the Federal Reserve. You see here, the only other time when the Federal Reserve balance sheet experienced sustained losses was from 1978 to around 1982, 83, 85, whatever that is. It's a long time, and that is the losses that the bank had to sustain in order to get price inflation under control. And now the losses are about $1 trillion, which is 4 times the height of the maximum here of 250 billion. So the Fed is experiencing massive, massive losses. And the only thing they can do is continue those losses. And so you may be asking a question. If the Fed is losing so much money, then why is the dollar still alive? Well, if you've ever seen The Big Short, you may remember that there was a time of several months, and it was agonizingly long for those who were short the housing market, where the market had already collapsed, but the prices were not being marked to market, and nobody understood why it was happening. It was as if Wile E. Coyote was standing on nothing, patting the floor of air and not falling.
The bonds aren't going down. They won't move. It's possible that we are in a completely fraudulent system.
Well, it's happening again. And to show you exactly how it is happening, I'm going to show you one more chart. This is the US M2 money supply counting demand deposits and savings deposits mainly in the banking system. When this number falls, it means that people are defaulting on their debts because deposits in the banking system are chiefly debt since they can be loaned out. And that debt counts as currency that is in a bank account that is uncovered, but it still shows up in the statistic. And when this total starts to fall, that is a sign of absolute deflation. Now, we saw in 2008, we see this little bump here. This is a tiny little nothing compared to what is happening now, because you see here as the line goes nearly vertical at the COVID printing and then levels off just a bit, but has a very, very high slope over here. Now we are seeing a negative slope sustained for the first time, and I'll show you exactly when this started. If we go back to the year chart, it started in January when the money supply was 21.8 trillion, and now it is 21.667 trillion. And so we see here that this negative slope in the money supply is happening for pretty much the first time ever. And so this deflation is going to be extreme, and it's going to take the dollar down with it. And now gold and silver could be volatile in the short term here, But in the end, they're going to absorb all of this destruction, and all of the purchasing power of Exeter's pyramid is going to be flushed down into the gold and silver base of the pyramid. All the economic goods in the world are going to pretty much remain in existence, while the purchasing power of what can acquire them will shift to the base of the pyramid rather than the derivative top of it as is now.
Brought to you by Glagnar's Human Rinds. It's a buncha muncha cruncha human.